HOA Karen drowned my disabled daughter in her pool just to teach her how to swim. It was supposed to be a normal summer afternoon. The sun was shining, the neighborhood was alive with laughter, and the air was filled with the scent of chlorine. Emma, my precious daughter, had been eagerly waiting for this day. A simple pool party, something she had been looking forward to for weeks. She loved being around the other kids, despite her disability, always trying to fit in, always trying to be part of the world she sometimes felt disconnected from. But I had no idea that the events of this day would turn our lives upside down. Karen, the HOA president, had insisted on teaching Emma how to swim. She always had this way of making it seem like she was doing something for our good, a favor we couldn't refuse. At first, I hesitated. I knew how hard it was for Emma to even dip her toes into water. She'd never fully trusted it, always afraid of what it might do to her. But Karen's constant insistence felt almost like pressure. She promised it would be good for her, that it was a step toward independence. Emma wasn't one to back down from a challenge, but she was scared. I could see it in her eyes. "Don't worry, sweetie. Just a little bit of practice," Karen reassured her with that too-sweet smile. I was watching from the side, my heart pounding in my chest. But as the seconds passed, everything felt wrong. The pool seemed to be growing colder, the air thicker, more suffocating. Karen was pushing Emma too far, too fast. I tried to speak up, but my voice caught in my throat, drowned out by the sound of Emma's panicked breaths. Before I could reach her, Karen gave a push, a forceful, unnecessary shove, sending my disabled daughter straight into the deep end. My heart stopped. "Emma!" I screamed, rushing forward, but the scene unfolded too quickly. The pool water splashed in every direction, and for a split second, it felt like everything around us had frozen. There was nothing but the cold, terrifying silence. My daughter, struggling against the water, unable to lift herself up, gasping for air, helpless. Karen stood by the side, watching. It didn't register at first. How could it? Was this really happening? Was Karen actually letting this happen? My daughter was drowning, and she was just standing there, her face twisted into something I could only describe as satisfaction. My instincts kicked in. I jumped in. But in that moment, time felt like it was moving in slow motion. Emma's life, once again, was in the hands of someone who should have been protecting her. Our story begins in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, where life moves at a pace most people take for granted. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. The sun always seemed to shine, just a little brighter here, the lawns a little greener, and the houses a little tidier. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the HOA Homeowners Association was the unspoken force that kept everything in check. There was a sense of order, of control that promised peace, but beneath that surface, the reality of living in such a perfect little world was not as idyllic as it seemed. My name is Sarah, and I am a mother to Emma, a 10-year-old girl who was born with cerebral palsy. Emma had always been different from the other children. Her disability made many things difficult for her, especially in a world that wasn't designed for people like her. Every step she took was harder, every task a challenge. She had the heart of a lion, though, and a spirit that was impossible to break. Emma had a way of shining through her limitations, of making the impossible seem possible, if only for a moment. But those moments were hard-earned, and they came with a cost. Our family was no stranger to adversity. Emma's disability had shaped every aspect of our lives. It was a constant balancing act between helping her feel normal while also shielding her from the harsh realities of the world. I tried to give her as much independence as possible, but the truth was, the world didn't always make it easy, and that's where the HOA, and more specifically Karen, came into the picture. Karen was the president of the HOA, a position she wore like a crown. At first glance, Karen seemed like the perfect neighbor, polite, charming, and always willing to lend a hand. She had a way of making people feel seen, of making them believe she was there to help. I thought Emma and I had found an ally in her, someone who would understand Emma's challenges and offer a supportive hand when needed. But Over time, I began to realize that Karen's kindness was often conditional and her concern had an underlying agenda. At first, Karen's interactions with Emma were nothing more than a few kind words, some compliments about how strong she was. She always made sure to greet us with a warm smile, and she even offered to help with minor tasks around the house. But when Karen learned that Emma had difficulty with certain activities, things started to shift. Karen began to take more of an interest in Emma's life, but not in the way you'd expect from a kind neighbor. She started to make suggestions about things Emma should be doing to improve her independence, swimming being one of the first things she pushed. Swimming will help her strength, Karen insisted one afternoon as we were talking by the mailbox. It's good for kids like her. She needs to learn how to swim. It'll give her confidence. I had always known that Emma was afraid of water. The sensation of it, the feeling of being submerged, was something that overwhelmed her. And yet, Karen seemed to think that if Emma didn't learn to swim, she would somehow be held back from her potential. Her well-intentioned words felt more like pressure than advice. The truth was, Karen didn't understand Emma. She didn't see how much Emma struggled just to get through the day. Swimming wasn't a therapeutic tool for Emma. It was a new, scary challenge that she wasn't ready for. But Karen was relentless. She kept pushing, and I, in my desperation to give Emma every opportunity to fit in, reluctantly agreed. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice the subtle manipulations that Karen used to get what she wanted. At first, it was small things, suggestions that felt more like demands. Emma really should try swimming today, she would say, casually inviting us to join her at the pool. She would talk about it as if it were the only solution to Emma's difficulties, as though swimming was the magic fix to all her problems. She framed it as an opportunity for Emma to catch up with the other kids. But Emma wasn't like the other kids. She wasn't able to just dive into things with the same ease that came so naturally to them. Every day was a challenge, whether it was getting dressed, going to school, or making friends. These were not small struggles for Emma. They were mountains she had to climb, and each one took everything she had. I knew that swimming would not be the miracle Karen thought it would be, but I also knew how difficult it was for me to stand up to Karen, especially when everyone around her seemed to buy into her facade of caring. The pool party invitation came just a few weeks later. It was supposed to be a fun, casual event. An afternoon by the pool with drinks and snacks, a chance to enjoy the summer. But there was an undercurrent of expectation running through it. Karen had made it clear that she thought Emma should get in the pool and at least try to swim. She even went as far as to tell me that this was the perfect time for her to learn, that if she didn't start now, she'd be behind. And so there we were, Emma, hesitant and scared, standing by the edge of the pool while Karen stood by, watching her every move. The other children were already splashing around, laughing, but Emma was frozen. She wasn't ready. She wasn't prepared. And yet there Karen was pushing her forward, telling her to get in to try to be brave. What Karen didn't understand was that Emma's disability wasn't something you could just overcome with a few swim lessons. It wasn't something you could just fix by throwing her into the deep end. Emma needed time, patience, and understanding. But instead, Karen was determined to teach her a lesson, one that would push her past her limits, without any regard for the emotional or physical toll it would take. This was the beginning of something much darker than I could have imagined. Karen's seemingly kind intentions were hiding a much more dangerous side, a side that would push Emma into the very depths of fear, and a side that would change our lives forever. The days leading up to the pool party felt like an unbearable weight. The excitement that had once filled Emma's heart for summer fun was slowly replaced with anxiety. She had always been nervous around water, a fear she had inherited early on, stemming from a traumatic experience during a therapy session when she was younger. The sound of water splashing, the sensation of it surrounding her, these were things Emma could not easily ignore. I knew that, deep down, she wasn't ready for what Karen was demanding of her. But with Karen's constant pushing and the promise of social acceptance, I wondered if maybe I was wrong to hold Emma back. Maybe it was time for her to overcome this fear, to push through it as Karen kept suggesting. I wanted to be strong for Emma, to reassure her that everything would be fine. But the truth was, I wasn't sure. I had never witnessed Karen's true intentions before, not like this. It was as if she had a different agenda, something that had more to do with proving a point than actually helping Emma. The pressure of living in a neighborhood where every interaction seemed scrutinized by the HOA only made things worse. Emma was under enough stress as it was. She didn't need the added burden of having to prove herself to Karen, of being forced into something she wasn't ready for. The morning of the pool party arrived, and the air seemed thicker as though the weight of the moment hung in the atmosphere. I tried to calm Emma as we prepared to leave, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to face Karen, not with the expectation that she would get into that pool. But I told her we had to, that it was important. After all, how could we let the neighborhood down? How could I protect her from this and still allow her to fit in? Mom, I don't want to swim, Emma said quietly as she stood in front of the mirror, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her swimsuit. I know, sweetheart, but maybe we can just watch for a little while. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, I said, kneeling to meet her eye level. I could see her relief in that moment, but I also knew it was short-lived. I was already trying to make excuses, but Karen's voice was too loud in my mind. She would have insisted, and I had no doubt that she would make Emma feel like she was somehow failing if she didn't participate. We arrived at Karen's house, and the air in the neighborhood seemed unusually still. The backyard pool area was already filled with a few of the other families chatting and laughing. The sound of splashing water echoed, a reminder of the challenge waiting for us. I could see Karen standing by the edge of the pool, her posture upright, like a commander awaiting the start of a mission. She smiled brightly when she saw us, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "Sarah, Emma, you made it," Karen said, her voice cheerful. But there was an undertone to it, a sense of expectation that was almost suffocating. "I'm so glad you could join us. We're about to start the lesson, and I've been telling the kids all about Emma's swimming lesson today." Emma's face tightened, and she tried to step behind me as if she could hide from Karen's pressure. But Karen was already moving toward her, her steps firm and deliberate. "Come on, sweetie," Karen said, reaching out to Emma. "It's time for your lesson. I'm sure you're going to do great. You've got this." I could see the fear in Emma's eyes. She wanted to back away, to retreat, but Karen was already pulling her toward the water. I hesitated, torn between stepping in and doing what I thought was best for Emma and the looming pressure to let Karen have her way. I could already feel the tension rising. Karen was too focused on making Emma learn something she wasn't ready for. Emma's discomfort was clear, but Karen's persistence seemed to overshadow it. "No, Karen," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "She's not ready for this. She told you she doesn't want to swim today." But Karen wasn't listening. She simply smiled and said, "Don't worry, Sarah. She'll be fine. Trust me, this is for the best." I could see it now. Karen wasn't just offering help. She was imposing her own vision of what Emma's life should look like. To her, Emma was just another project to fix, another child to mold. She didn't see Emma as a person, as my daughter with unique needs and a fear of water. She saw her as an obstacle to overcome, a challenge to conquer, and her relentless drive to help was suffocating. I stood frozen, my mouth dry, unsure of how to stop the train that was barreling toward us. Emma's body stiffened as Karen gently but firmly nudged her toward the pool steps. I could see the fear on her face, and my heart twisted. Emma took slow, hesitant steps, her body trembling. She wasn't ready. I wanted to scream, to grab her and pull her away from Karen's grasp, but I couldn't. I couldn't protect her from everything. As they neared the edge of the pool, Karen's words continued to echo in Emma's ears, words that tried to sound encouraging but only made Emma feel more alienated. "Don't worry, Emma. You'll be fine. You just need to trust the water and trust me." Emma stopped in her tracks, her feet Barely touching the first step, her body tense with fear. The pool water sparkled in the sunlight, but to Emma, it wasn't beautiful, it was terrifying. I could see it. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and I could feel it deep within myself. It was the same fear I had when I saw Emma face a challenge that was too much for her, a challenge that didn't take her unique needs into account. But Karen wasn't listening to that fear. She was pushing her forward, insisting that this was what was best for her. "Come on, Emma," Karen said softly, but there was an edge to her voice, a sense of impatience that had begun to creep in. "You can't be afraid forever." That's when I knew. Karen wasn't just encouraging Emma to swim. She was trying to break her down, to make her conform to her own expectations. The power dynamic was shifting, and I was losing control. I had to do something. But what could I do when Karen had already made Emma feel so small, so incapable of saying no? As Emma stood there, on the precipice of the water, I could feel the tension building. The air felt thick, the moment hanging like a fragile thread ready to snap. The quiet murmur of the other families around the pool faded into the background. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and Emma's shallow, fearful breaths. And then, just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, Karen's voice broke through again, sharper this time. "Come on, Emma. You don't want to be the only one who can't swim, do you?" It was a subtle jab, but it cut deep. Emma flinched, and I saw the pain flash across her face. Karen was playing on Emma's insecurities now, turning this into a test of worth, a test of value. It wasn't about learning to swim anymore. It was about proving something Emma wasn't ready to prove. With a final push, Karen guided Emma further into the water until she was standing in the deep end. Emma's hands clutched the side of the pool, her body shaking uncontrollably. And that's when I knew everything was about to go terribly wrong. The moment I had feared, the moment I knew deep down was inevitable was upon us. My heart pounded and my pulse raced. The air around the pool felt heavy, suffocating, even as if it was pressing down on my chest. I couldn't breathe, not from the heat of the day, but from the sheer tension in the air. Emma was in the water, her small form trembling, clinging to the edge of the pool with everything she had. I could see it. The terror in her eyes, the desperate grip on the pool side, as if it was the only thing keeping her from sinking. Karen was still standing beside her, a forced smile plastered across her face. Her voice was soft, coaxing, but there was a sharpness in it, an edge I hadn't noticed before. "Come on, Emma. You're doing great. Just let go of the edge and try to float. It's so easy once you trust the water." Emma's body was rigid, her arms shaking as she gripped the pool's edge even tighter. She was looking at me now, her eyes wide with fear, silently pleading for help, for release from this unbearable situation. But I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't seem to find my voice, let alone the strength to intervene. Emma's fear was palpable, her chest heaving as she struggled to calm herself. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to be pushed into something she wasn't ready for. And yet, Karen persisted. "You can't hold on forever, sweetie," she said, her tone no longer kind, no longer reassuring. There was something colder in her words now, something that felt more like a demand than encouragement. "You need to learn how to swim. You can't keep clinging to the side." Emma was still shaking, and I could feel my own anxiety rising, choking me from the inside. Every part of me screamed to intervene, to shout at Karen, to pull Emma away from this madness, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. My feet felt like lead, glued to the ground as I watched my daughter, my precious girl, struggle with a challenge far beyond what she could handle. And then it happened. In one swift motion, Karen placed her hands on Emma's shoulders. She wasn't gentle, she wasn't coaxing anymore. This was something else entirely. Something cold, calculated, and cruel. "It's time," Karen said, almost as if she were speaking to herself, her voice hardening with impatience. Before I could even process what was happening, Karen shoved Emma hard. It all unfolded in what felt like slow motion. I saw Emma's body jerk as she lost her grip on the pool side. Her legs kicked out, her face twisted in shock and panic as she plunged into the deep water. I could hear her gasp, the air knocked out of her as she went under. My stomach lurched, and my entire world tilted on its axis. I screamed, her name, my voice hoarse, desperate, terrified. Emma! No! I shouted, my feet finally breaking free of their paralysis, but the sound of her terrified cries and the splash of water filled the air, drowning out everything else. I rushed toward the pool, my body moving on pure instinct, but time seemed to stretch in all directions. My daughter, who had always been so brave in the face of her challenges, was now completely overwhelmed. I saw her arms flailing, her face contorted in terror as she struggled to find the surface. She was gasping for air, but the water kept swallowing her up, her body weighed down by the panic that had taken hold of her. Help! Somebody, please! I screamed, but the words felt useless, empty. There was no one close enough to intervene. The other families around the pool were frozen, watching, their faces expressionless, some even appearing confused by the scene unfolding before them. But Karen, she stood there, her hands on her hips, an eerie calm in her posture, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. As if Emma's life didn't hang in the balance. The sight of Emma's desperate struggle sent my heart into a frenzy. I could see her now, her legs kicking, her body twisting in the water as she tried to push herself up, to rise above the overwhelming tide of panic and fear. Her small arms flailed helplessly, trying to grab onto anything, but the water only dragged her deeper, deeper into the chaos. Her eyes were wide with terror, and I could hear her gasping for breath between each frantic movement. Emma! I shouted again, my voice breaking. I was almost there, almost within reach, but Karen was still standing by the side, watching. She hadn't moved an inch, not even to check if Emma was okay. I could see it now. Her face twisted in something I couldn't quite understand. Was it amusement, or was it indifference? Either way, it didn't matter. She had pushed Emma too far, too soon. And now, Emma was drowning in the very thing that Karen had forced her into. I reached the edge of the pool and grabbed hold of a ladder, pulling myself up, my hand outstretched toward Emma. But she was too far gone, her body sinking lower into the water. The fear inside me intensified, every nerve in my body screaming for me to save her, to pull her out of this nightmare. Emma, grab my hand. I yelled, my voice cracking. But Emma couldn't hear me. She was too focused on staying afloat, on simply surviving. And Karen? She was still standing by the side of the pool, her gaze unflinching, her eyes trained on Emma's struggle. She had made her move. The lesson was unfolding in front of her, whether Emma wanted it or not. I couldn't stand it anymore. With everything I had, I dove into the pool, the cold water shocking my body as I swam toward Emma. I reached her just as her head dipped below the surface, once more, her body limp with exhaustion. My heart was in my throat as I grabbed her waist and pulled her toward me, holding her tightly as I swam toward the side. The world around me seemed to collapse. The pool, the air, the people, it all faded away. The only thing that mattered was Emma, her fragile body in my arms, her face pale, her eyes closed in unconsciousness. I finally reached the edge of the pool, heaving Emma's body up, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma, stay with me, baby. Please stay with me. I begged, my voice hoarse and full of fear. I couldn't even tell if she was breathing. My mind raced, my hands trembling as I tried to pull her up out of the water. But the weight of the situation was too much. I couldn't think straight. Everything felt wrong. The terror of seeing my daughter in that condition, drowned, broken, unable to fight for herself, was more than I could bear. And Karen? She still stood there, watching as if nothing had happened. The moment of fear, the moment of life and death, had passed her by like a passing cloud. But I wasn't done. I wasn't done fighting for Emma. And I would make sure Karen's actions would never go unchallenged. The sound of Emma's shallow breaths finally broke through the haze in my mind. She was alive, but she wasn't okay. Not yet. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew this. Emma had survived. And Karen, she would answer for what she had done. The moments after Emma's rescue felt like a blur. My body was shaking uncontrollably, adrenaline coursing through me as I struggled to hold her steady, my arms trembling with the weight of what had just happened. The poolside was a chaotic mess. People were finally moving, their voices rising in a mixture of shock and confusion. But none of it mattered. None of it could bring back the calm that had been shattered in that instant. "Emma, honey, stay with me," I whispered, my voice trembling. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, but there was life in her still. She wasn't gone. Not yet. And I wouldn't let her go. I could feel the weight of the eyes around me, the stares of the other neighbors as they gathered around, murmuring among themselves. But no one came to help. They just watched. Not a single person moved to intervene while Karen stood by, motionless. Her smile was gone, replaced by an emotionless expression. I couldn't read it, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to understand what was behind her cold gaze. All that mattered was Emma, my baby girl, alive and in my arms. "Is she all right?" One of the other mothers asked, her voice shaky. She had finally moved closer, but her eyes were still locked on Karen. "What happened?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled Emma closer to me, my protective instincts kicking in. She was barely conscious, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again. The fear I had seen in her eyes earlier was still there, but now it was different. Now it was a quiet terror, a fear of being overwhelmed, of drowning not just in water, but in the weight of something much deeper. Karen, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "She's fine," she said, her tone too neutral, too rehearsed. "Just needs to get used to it." This is exactly what I meant by learning to swim. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to face her, my anger rising like a tidal wave, but I had to hold it in. My first priority was Emma. I couldn't let Karen's cold words rattle me now. Emma needed me. "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking with emotion. "You pushed her too far, Karen. You didn't see what was happening. You didn't see her fear. She's terrified of water. You forced her into this. I told you she wasn't ready." Karen didn't react, not in the way I expected. She didn't apologize. She didn't show any remorse. Instead, she crossed her arms, her lips pressed together in a tight line. "I was just trying to help," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. But there was no sincerity in it. "Help!" I spat, my words cutting through the air. "You nearly killed her, Karen. You nearly took her life. This isn't helping, this is manipulation, and you crossed the line." She took a step back, her eyes narrowing as if she were weighing her next move. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there watching as I cradled Emma in my arms, my heart aching with the realization that what had happened was beyond repair. The damage had been done, and no words could undo the terror that Emma had experienced. As I sat there holding Emma close, her fragile body trembling against me, I could hear the distant murmur of the other neighbors. They were talking now, whispers of disbelief and confusion, their voices bouncing around the pool area like echoes in an empty room. Some of them seemed to be on Karen's side, their eyes darting from her to me, unsure of what to believe. Others had started to gather around, offering their condolences, but the moment felt hollow. Nothing could change what had just occurred. I glanced around, trying to spot anyone who would step in, who would help me make sense of this situation. But no one came forward. No one stepped in to stop Karen. They had all been content to watch from the sidelines, passive observers in a situation that had spiraled out of control. "Sarah, we should call an ambulance," one of the mothers said, quietly, her eyes flickering nervously between me and Emma. "She's not well." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. I hadn't even realized it until now, but Emma's breathing was still shallow, her color pale. My protective instincts kicked in once again. I couldn't let her go, not until I knew for sure she was okay, but I also knew deep down that something had shifted in her, something that couldn't be fixed by a simple hospital visit. "Please," I said, my voice breaking, "get help. I need to make sure she's okay." As the mother hurried off to call an ambulance, I felt the weight of the moment settle in. I was no longer just angry. I was broken, broken for Emma, broken for all the moments she had been robbed of, all because Karen had insisted on pushing her too far. My mind raced with the implications of what had happened. This wasn't just a physical injury. This wasn't just about water. This was about trust, about the betrayal of a woman who had pretended to care. And I couldn't let that go. I couldn't let Emma's suffering be brushed aside, dismissed as a simple lesson gone wrong. "You're never going near her again," I said, my voice low but full of finality as I turned to face Karen. "You've done enough damage." For the first time, Karen's expression faltered. There was no more calm in her demeanor. Her eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or perhaps guilt, though I doubted she understood the gravity of her actions. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. "I said you're done," I repeated, my voice shaking but firm. "Don't come near my daughter again." And with that, I turned away from her, holding Emma tightly in my arms, focusing on nothing but her safety, her well-being. The ambulance arrived minutes later, the sirens cutting through the tension-filled air. As the paramedics worked to check Emma's vitals, I stayed close, never letting her go. My heart was in pieces, but at least she was alive. She was still here with me, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she stayed that way. Karen watched from a distance, her figure small and insignificant against the backdrop of everything that had just transpired. The once perfect neighborhood, the once perfect woman, both were shattered in that moment, forever changed by the consequences of pushing a child too far. But for me, the fight wasn't over. Not yet. I wouldn't let Emma's suffering be forgotten, and I wouldn't let Karen's actions go unchallenged. It wasn't just about this one incident. It was about holding people accountable, about protecting the vulnerable, and about making sure no one else would have to face what Emma did that day. I looked down at my daughter, her small hand gripping mine, and I whispered softly, "We're going to be okay, Emma. I promise. We're going to make sure this never happens again." The aftermath of that day was a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, and ultimately a sense of betrayal that would linger for much longer than I could have imagined. The days following the incident were a blur of hospital visits, phone calls, and people trying to piece together what had happened. But despite the chaos, one thing was certain: Emma was alive. And for that, I was thankful. But alive wasn't the same as okay. As the paramedics had examined Emma that day, I had seen the look in their eyes, the unspoken understanding that this wasn't just a physical injury. Her pulse was steady, her breathing had returned to normal, but the emotional scars were already starting to show. She had always been a brave child. But now, she recoiled at the sound of water, flinched at the sight of a pool, and even at the mention of Karen's name, her face would tense up. The fear that had been planted in her wasn't something that could be erased in a day, or even in a year. When we returned home from the hospital, Emma crawled into bed, pulling the covers tightly around herself as if to shield herself from the world. I sat beside her, my heart heavy with guilt. Had I done the right thing? Had I been too weak to stand up to Karen earlier? Should I have never let her near Emma in the first place? The guilt consumed me in waves, and I couldn't seem to shake the thoughts that kept running through my mind. In the days that followed, I found myself consumed with one thought: revenge, justice, whatever you wanted to call it. Karen had done this. She had crossed a line that no one should ever cross with a child. She had turned an opportunity for growth into a traumatic experience. And I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I called a lawyer. The next few weeks became a blur of legal meetings, emails, and phone calls. The HOA, who had once prided themselves on their community values, were suddenly tight-lipped, unwilling to speak up on Karen's behalf or even acknowledge what had happened. The more I dug, the more I uncovered Karen's history of pushing boundaries, of bending the rules to fit her narrative, of manipulating those around her to get what she wanted. She had used her position as the HOA president to exert control, to make people conform to her ideals, no matter the cost. And now, Emma had paid the price. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA, demanding that Karen be removed from her position. I reached out to the neighbors who had witnessed the event and asked them to come forward as witnesses. Some of them had already begun to show signs of regret, recognizing that they hadn't intervened when they should have. Others, still loyal to Karen, tried to justify her actions, claiming that she had only been trying to help. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done, and I wasn't going to let it slide. Eventually, after weeks of back and forth, Karen was forced to step down from her role as HOA president. The community, albeit reluctantly, had recognized the impact of her actions. She had crossed a line that no one could ignore. But even with her removed from power, I knew that wasn't enough. She needed to be held accountable for what she had done to Emma. I filed a lawsuit seeking damages for emotional distress and trauma. Karen's attempts to downplay the situation, to justify her actions as tough love, only served to fuel my determination. There were moments during the legal process when I questioned myself, wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was making Emma's trauma worse by continuing to fight. But then I would see her face, the fear, the confusion, the pain that still lingered long after the pool incident. And I knew without a doubt that this fight wasn't just for me. It was for Emma, for her future, for her ability to trust again. As the case moved forward, I found myself wrestling with another emotion, forgiveness. In the quiet moments, when I wasn't consumed with anger and frustration, I thought about Karen. I thought about her upbringing, her own insecurities, the pressures she must have felt to always be in control. In some ways, she had acted out of her own brokenness. But that didn't excuse her actions. It didn't make her actions any less damaging. I realized, slowly, that I didn't need to forgive her. Not for her sake, but for mine. I couldn't carry the weight of forgiveness for someone who had caused so much harm. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed her. It was something I owed myself. As the months went by, Emma slowly began to heal. The nightmares she had at night faded, and the fear of water eventually subsided, though it never completely disappeared. I enrolled her in therapy where she could speak about the trauma she had experienced, and together we worked through her fears, her pain, and her struggles. It wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks, moments when it seemed like we had made no progress at all, but with each passing day, I saw more of the strong, brave girl I knew Emma to be. She was resilient, and her spirit had not been broken, no matter how hard Karen had tried. In the end, the lawsuit was settled, and Karen was forced to pay for her actions. But more than the financial compensation, it was the acknowledgement of Emma's pain that mattered. It was the recognition that what had happened was not just an unfortunate incident, it was a deliberate act of cruelty, one that would forever alter the course of Emma's life. I made a vow to myself that day to never let anyone, especially someone in a position of power, harm my family again. No one would be allowed to use their influence to manipulate or control us. No one would be allowed to push my daughter into a corner where she had to fight for her life. As for Karen, she faded from our lives, a shadow of the woman she once was, but I knew she would never again have the power to hurt us. And as I watched Emma smile again, her eyes lighting up with hope and determination, I knew we had come through this stronger than before. The healing had begun, and with every step, we were moving toward a future where Emma would no longer be afraid. We would be okay. If you've been touched by Emma's story and the struggles that families like ours face, it's time to take action. It's easy to think that what happened to us could never happen to you, but the truth is, situations like this happen far more often than we realize. We need to stand up against those who use their power to manipulate and hurt others, especially when it comes to the most vulnerable members of our society, our children. If you've experienced something similar, or if you see someone being pushed into a dangerous situation, don't stay silent. Speak out. Protect those who can't protect themselves. No one should have to endure the pain and trauma that Emma went through. Share her story, share the message of resilience, and help raise awareness of the dangers of pushing children past their limits. For those who have witnessed injustice, it's time to take a stand. Speak up, make sure those responsible are held accountable, and never let anyone's actions go unnoticed. Let's make sure Emma's story isn't just another tragedy. Let it be a catalyst for change, a reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect one another. Join us in this fight for justice, for accountability, and for a future where no child has to face this kind of harm again.